Yesterday, Drew Brees was answering an interview for Yahoo Finance, I think. I don't know how, I don't know what that conversation was about the kneeling of the national anthem that Colin Kaepernick did, which led to a lot of players in the NFL kneeling during the national anthem in the past, which led to a lot of discourse in our society for what it was happening and how it was happening. And Drew Brees, in a very tone-deaf answer, especially in the world that we're currently living in, ignited those thoughts and reactions of players of the past. Let me tell you why I think so many people were disappointed with Drew Brees that are in the professional athlete world. Now, granted, a lot of people outside the professional athletic world were also disappointed with Drew Brees, but let me tell you why it struck a chord with so many professional athletes. Because of this, we have to go back to the time when the national anthem protest with Colin Kaepernick was happening. So Colin Kaepernick and Nate Boyer, who's an Army Green Beret, and who else? Eric Reed. Eric Reed was there as well. They decided, instead of sitting down on the bench for the national anthem, Nate Boyer, who's a Army Green Beret, was there with him. And he said, instead of sitting, which could be very disrespectful, kneel, because it would be taking a stance while still maybe grieving for America. I forget how the entire decision was made, but Colin Kaepernick, Eric Reed wanted to make a stand for injustice in our society. So they kneeled during the national anthem. So obviously in the NFL world, that became something that started conversations in every single locker room, because a lot of guys who come from neighborhoods and communities that are mostly black saw what Colin Kaepernick was doing for his community and thought to themselves, if I don't do it, what will my community think of me, who's going through the same things that Colin Kaepernick's community is going through, in the same thing that a lot of these communities that we're seeing displayed for injustices on TV are going through. So these conversations that got ignited in locker rooms between players, and this is something that I've been harping on for a long time right now, is the reason why I hope that a locker room mentality, an NFL locker room mentality, spreads into the world, is because you get a chance to learn about things that you would have never learned before. You get a chance to see through somebody else's eyes what their lives have been, who you may not have ever been able to experience before. I've said it on numerous occasions. I might be one of the only people in the history of this earth who has smoked blunts with dudes from Compton and drank wine with billionaires. That is a true thing. Dad, a truck driver, mom, a secretary. I've got a chance to see and experience and learn a lot of things. In the locker room is the reason why. So whenever the kneeling all started happening and America started getting ripped apart because of it, because the messaging from one side was, we don't care what the protesters are saying this is about. The way we are taking this is disrespect to the military and to the American flag. And that caused quite a conversation in the locker room, because like me, there's a lot of people in the locker room who are massive supporters of the military. I mean, I was a Salute to Service award finalist. There's only 3 in the NFL. I have a foundation that gives scholarships to children of military families. I've gone on a USO tour to Japan. I've spent over $1 million to send military members and their families to football games throughout my career with the Indianapolis Colts. I am a military supporter. Okay? I don't support all the wars. I have no idea what some of the wars are for. I have no idea what a lot of the things, decisions are being made, but I am always pro-warrior, because I had somebody in my life, one of my brother's best friends, who was like a brother to me, had shrapnel blown up on his leg in Iraq, and it became one of these things where, well, you know what? This isn't a video game. This is real life. So whenever these messages started getting out about this protest, and in the middle of America, I don't think a lot of people knew on the coast, but in the middle of America, the message was getting sent very loud and very clear, because in the middle of America, by the way, this is where a lot of the military comes from. Damn near every human that lives in the middle of our country either knows somebody who served in the military or has a family member that served in the military. So whenever the messaging was sent that this is disrespectful to the military, this is disrespectful to the American flag, that's all they heard. And whenever you get somebody that is that passionate about something, their family member, maybe somebody they died, and now you're being told from somebody that isn't talking to the protester and hearing what the protester is saying and what they're doing it for, you automatically get emotional about it, and it's very hard to change your first initial reaction to something, especially when it's that emotionally charged. So these led to conversations in the locker room from players that had military family and military friends with the guys on their team that were protesting, and it led to very raw conversations. very genuine conversations. One of the coolest times to be in a locker room was during that, whenever issues were being stated by friends of ours and teammates of ours that come from black communities that many people could never understand. That is why we are protesting. And then obviously, Colin Kaepernick wears the pig cop socks. And then he says something about Fidel Castro. So that even more kicks in the people that are like, look at him disrespecting America. This is what this is about. While everybody else who is protesting and knew what Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed and a lot of other NFL players were actually protesting, those messages never came together. Those messages continued to go the different direction. And us in the locker room tried to tell as many people as possible is it's not a disrespect to the military. They had a military guy with them, Nate Boyer. That is not their message. If that is what came across, they don't mean that, because the conversations we were having in locker rooms were so raw, so real, so deep, so genuine, and so eye-opening. So whenever all these other professional athletes who know that Drew Brees was in the locker room during these conversations and knows that the messaging wasn't to disrespect the flag or to disrespect the military, what it was instead was hopefully an attempt to raise awareness for people what's happening in our black communities, not just police injustice, by the way. We get a chance to see those. The George Floyd situation a week and a half ago has changed this country forever. I think it's going to make us better. It's going to bring people together. I think the riots and looting kind of got us off track. But there's also other things that happen in black communities that if you didn't grow up in one, you really would never understand. There's laws that are enforced and kind of enacted upon to prey on some communities. Then there's a turnover rate of going back to jail for something little petty where an entire generation loses a father. And then there's mistrust between not only the community and cops, but the communities and white people in general, because the white people are the only people they see are the people that are coming in to arrest their family members. There's laws and things of that nature that we don't really understand. If you didn't grow up in the neighborhood. And those were the conversations that were happening in locker rooms. So when Drew Brees was asked about that, instead of stating, which, by the way, I might be completely wrong here. I don't know if Drew Brees is a polished speaker. The fact that they were just going to hand him Monday Night Football and Sunday Night Football without knowing about that is wild to me. But instead of answering it in a fashion where he could reflect the opinions and views of what was actually happening in the protest to people who might not understand that, he decided to go ahead and continue to the narrative of what the protest wasn't about. And I think that is why you saw so many people heartbroken about what Drew Brees said. I think that is why there was such a massive reaction by professional athletes, because in a locker room, you are together. In a locker room, you are brothers. In a locker room, you get a chance to hear stories that not a lot of people get to hear, because people only get to hear things from the networks that they choose to watch. So sometimes the network that you choose to watch doesn't show the other side or inform you on things. So I think that is why the Drew Brees answer yesterday hit home so hard with so many people, because he was a part of those conversations and knew that the protest was by no means an attempt to disrespect the military. And the fact that he decided to push that narrative was his answer, whether he wanted to or not. It was heartbreaking to everybody else that ever played football with him, alongside him, or were in the locker rooms during that time, because it was not a great time to be in the NFL. It was not a great time it was not a fun time, because sports are supposed to be an escape for people. That's what this show is supposed to be. Sundays for a lot of people is their sanctuary. Hey, I don't want to hear about anything else happening in the world. I just want to see my team try to beat the hell out of the team from the other city. That's all I want to do. I grew up in a house where Sundays, bang, all we're doing, Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh Steelers win, we're happy for the next week. Pittsburgh Steelers lose, we're bummed for the next week. And that was the entire city. It was a sanctuary. So when Colin Kaepernick started raising real issues and real conversations during a sanctuary, plus with the messaging that it was against the military, it was basically pieced together to make people pissed off. It really was. And the protest wasn't supposed to be comfortable. No protest is comfortable. But I've said since the beginning, the messaging was split from what the protesters were trying to get accomplished versus what the rest of the world, the middle of the country was hearing and other people were hearing. And then now Drew Brees pushed that narrative that the protesters didn't want to be pushed. And I think that is why you're seeing people get completely up in arms about this. And that's why Aaron Rodgers, greatest quarterback of all time, came out last night and said, hey, we caught a lot of hell for standing in solidarity with our brothers from people that didn't understand what it was about. They gave us a lot of flack. It was not about the anthem then. It was not about the flag then. And it's not about that now. It's time for us to listen and have some hard conversations. That's what Colin Kaepernick was trying to do. The messaging didn't go that way. I think him wearing the pig cop socks in the Fidel Castro comment obviously didn't help whenever the people had their own narrative already built up, and then that gets thrown in there and they want to fight back even more. But the conversations that were happening in locker rooms were absolutely insightful. It was a learning experience, a bonding experience. And I think that is why you saw people say, Drew, damn, we're disappointed in you. And I'm not going to lie, I was as well, because Drew Brees is a guy who's a leader in the NFL. He's a guy who everybody respected, I thought, in the NFL. He was a guy who, anytime he got a chance to do something, it seemed like he was giving his maximum effort in doing so. And then now, whenever he gives that answer, you think to yourself, like, damn, Drew Brees, for this one moment, in this time period that we're living in, couldn't just be like a little bit more thoughtful. And instead, he just made it even worse. And that, I think, is why the Drew Brees thing is where it's at. I'm not happy with him not standing up for his teammates and saying, well, that's not what it was all about from begin with. I was in England with Antonio Cromartie. Antonio Cromartie stood for the English God Save the Queen, and then he kneeled for the American national anthem in England. And there was obviously a lot of chatter about it. I was on the plane ride with him home. I think there was a thought that he was potentially going to get fired after that game. And they would say it was potentially but it was a big time to be on a team. And everybody was trying to figure out the right answers. Nobody had them. The NFL couldn't change legislation at that exact moment. So they tried to put together a fund where the NFL and the players came together and were trying to give money back to underprivileged communities and societies. But the narrative still never got through to some people. And I think that is why these protests are continuing so long, because there's a lot of people on the internet that say, Colin Kaepernick and the NFL, they tried to peacefully protest to raise this conversation. It stopped. There's other times where this conversation has tried to be started. It stopped. Then the George Floyd murder happened. All 4 cops now arrested, finally. But we all saw that video and the conversation started, and bingo, we're getting on the same side. Then the riots happen, the looting happens. And by the way, once again, the messaging gets diverted exactly away from what it is. The people lock onto that again. And it's like, well, if these people never want to listen, maybe there is reason why people are pissed off about this whole thing. And I just think now is a time where we can really, I think we can do it. I really think we can do it. And that might be because I'm an optimist, but I feel like everybody with a brain is at the point where they're like, hey, if we learn a little bit more about these laws that are enacted in these communities that don't have a lot of opportunity, the schooling stinks. The teachers do not care. I mean, the teachers might care, but they don't have the ability or the necessity or not resources to really get anything done. There's not a lot of jobs for a lot of people. I mean, it all revolves around opportunity. And then whenever opportunity doesn't happen, then other things pop up. And then there's legislation and laws that kind of, it's a much different experience once you start listening to what the life is like for somebody who grows up in a neighborhood that's like that. And I think in the locker room, the Colin Kaepernick kneeling started such a good convo. And I really thought that we're just going to be able to do that everywhere. And that's why people are pissed off at Drew Brees.
Yeah, you talking about the locker room and the conversations in the locker room, and Drew lives in that locker room, made it so much more shocking that he would come out and seemingly not realize that the kneeling has nothing to do with.
Well, it's interesting because I don't think Drew Brees issued a very long apology this morning on his Instagram about how he is not the enemy. He's always been an ally. I think he kneeled, by the way. I think at one point he was a part of the kneel. I mean, so I think Drew Brees, I think those conversations did happen in the Saints locker room. Right? The same conversation that happened in the Colts locker room, I'm assuming happened in every other locker room, where it was quite a learning time, because you had a lot of players in there that were pissed off. They're like, hey, my brother is in the military currently. Like, I don't want to do that. And they're like, that's not what it's about. That's not what it's about. Okay, cool. We come together as a team. As we do, we learn more about each other. And then bang, here we are years later in the same conversations happening. It's like, hey, I think it's about time that we all just go ahead and do it. I mean, I think it's time to do it. I don't know how we make the change. I don't know how easy it's going to be. I don't think it's an overnight change. I think it's going to take maybe a generation. But it feels like the George Floyd murder is going to be one that's going to change it all. And Drew Brees had a chance to talk about that. He chose his words differently. He will pay for it. He is currently paying for it. And I would assume he feels terrible, but not as bad as the guys that were trying to make a protest for something and the narrative was pushed a different direction.